Hello and welcome to Across the Park Extra. Myself, Ian Mills and Andrew Price. We are delighted to be joined by an Everton legend. It's an Everton FC special, and it's someone that when the name and numbers first were a thing in 1993, I was right down the Everton shop and Cottee 9 was on the back of my home shirt. It is, of course, the man, Mr. Tony Cottee. Tony, thank you for joining us on Across the Park. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks, guys. Yeah, it's a pleasure to join you. And Everton's always a club close to my heart, so it's nice to have a chat with a couple of real fans and talk about the good old days. I'm guessing, but we can talk about the current team as well because they're doing all right, aren't they? Which I'm really pleased about.
Yeah, I think we'll cover both the good days and the bad days, but we'll get to it. Let's start with the good days. You signing for Everton in 1988. Sorry. £2.2 million was a record fee at the time. Mr. Colin Harvey, who was a previous guest on this show, brought you to Everton. I think Arsenal were in for you as well. And you being a London lad, was there a temptation to stay in London, or was it always Everton for you?
Do you know what, Ian? I mean, it's obviously a question I've been asked many times before. I mean, the Arsenal fans are relentless, giving me stick about you should have signed for Arsenal, you'd have won this and you'd have won that. And I'll come back to him straight away. So, well, listen, if I'd have signed for Arsenal, you never would have had Ian Wright, because Arsenal signed Ian Wright because they didn't get me. So when I say that to the Arsenal fans, it normally shuts them up a little bit, which is great. But listen, going back, I mean, I think the rumours sort of about Everton and Arsenal started sort of surfacing about a year before the actual transfer, and they was really the two. Although I was linked with many clubs, they was the two clubs that was always constantly linked with me. So. When the decision came round, it was a tough decision because, listen, everyone knows listen, one thing you'll get at me today, boys, is honesty. I'm a London boy. And the easy thing for me to do would have been to sign for a London club because obviously you don't move house. You just, you drive a little bit further to work and you play for another London team. But when it came to it, there was many factors that were a part of that transfer. And, I wanted to feel wanted by the new manager. Obviously, Colin Harvey was Everton manager and George Graham was the Arsenal manager. And I felt a lot more warmth from Colin, to be honest with you. Financially, I have come through the academy at West Ham and, I wasn't on what the other players were earning. So I wanted to obviously increase my wages. Everton's offer was far superior to Arsenal. And the bottom line really was where I sort of fitted into the team and what the manager wanted from me. So when I spoke to George Graham, he was talking about me chasing fullbacks and wearing Arsenal club blazers and things like that. And I thought, well, I'm not really interested in that, And then when I spoke to Colin, I'll never forget it. He said, I want you to come to this club and score me 25 goals a season. And that's exactly what he said to me. And I thought, everything Everton did, Sir Philip Carter was fantastic in terms of the negotiation. Everything Everton did ticked all the boxes. And unfortunately for Arsenal, I think they just felt because I was a London boy, I'm going to sign for Arsenal. And it was never as simple as that. But, I don't look back with any regret. I think you make a decision at the time and it was the correct decision in 1988. And I still look back now and say it's the correct decision now.
Yeah. And then on your home debut, of course, you scored a hat-trick against Newcastle in a 4-0 win. Players like Stuart McCall, Pat Nevin were at the club at the time. Just interested to know what your first impressions were of the Goodison faithful, how that game went, how you felt.
Yeah, I took a little while to get going, Andrew, really, didn't I? 34 seconds. So. Before the first goal went in. But it was a fantastic day, obviously, for me and my family. And I think it was 35 tickets I needed for the game, just for me, to get all my family and friends that had come up from London, whatever, So it was a big, big day for me. But I was staying, I don't know why, but the club put me in the Bold Hotel in Southport. And, for the actual game, I didn't actually know where Goodison was. I've got to be honest. I knew where the training ground was because I've been going to the training ground. Yeah. But we'd only been to Goodison for the team photo. So I hadn't really taken too much notice about how to get to the ground. So, of course, when my debut comes round, fortunately for me, Neil McDonald was staying at the same hotel, the Bold, and Macca said to me, well, look, I know how to get there. I went, oh, brilliant, I'll follow you in. So I'm going to make my debut and I'm driving in on a Saturday morning, not really knowing where I'm going. So it's all sort of quite funny and surreal, really. But, I mean, the game itself, I think if you could have sat me down before the game and said, what would be your dream debut? That was my dream debut. With all the pressure, Ian spoke about, the fee and everything, because it was a record transfer fee. There was so much build up in the papers. I mean, obviously it was different in those days. You didn't have Sky Sports and Talk Sport and all that sort of stuff. Everything was newspaper based. And it was just relentless in the papers about how I was cost all this money and I should be doing this, should be doing that. And there was a lot of pressure on me.
Yeah.
But to go out, to score the first goal, get a hat-trick, win 4-0, and then after the game, we just went and celebrated with all my family and friends. It was just a really, really special day that I look back on, you know. And I think a lot of the fans enjoyed it as well, you know, because the fans were expecting as well. You know, whoever went to that game turned up thinking Everton have paid a lot of money for this guy. You know, what's he like? Is he going to do any good? And I think, you know, the fans, every fan I speak to that was actually at the game that day, they all say, oh, what a great debut and what a great day. And a couple of them moan about missing the first goal because they didn't get until 3 minutes after.
Yeah, typical Evertonians, isn't it? Getting in just after Z cars or whatever.
Exactly, yeah. But it was a really, really special day. But of course, what it did do, it just put a lot of pressure on me. And, you know, everyone thought, oh, well, he's going to get a hat-trick every week. And, you know, but, you know, I felt that I'd scored 3 goals and I'm thinking, well, Cottee wants me to get 25. I'm now going to go on and get my 25 goals. And if only life was as easy as that, of course.
Yeah. And it was around that time, I think, what Colin tried to do was break up the 80s team and bring in new fresh blood. Obviously, yourself and a couple of others came in. What was that like when you came in? Was that feeling that you were, you know, he was trying to break up the old guard and trying to bring in his own ideas and his own players in? And was there a bit of friction between the old players there, or was it smooth?
Yeah, listen, as I said, I'll be honest with the interview. Yeah, of course. I think at times it was a little bit strained. And listen, obviously I had the view from the young players. I was a young player. I think I just turned 23 when I arrived at the club. It's, you know, it's still so young, really. Yeah. So I saw it, how it was from the new players' point of view. But also, I you know, looking back, you can understand the old players. You know, like, you know, players like Graham Sharp and Neville Southall, Kevin Ratcliffe, Kevin Sheedy, and they, you know, Dave Watson, all these fantastic players that have won the league some of them have won the league in 85 and 87. Yeah. Won the Cup Winners' Cup as well, you know, and they've done so much for the football club. And then, as I said about the newspapers, they're reading in the newspapers, and you know what the Sun and all the other papers are like. They're exaggerating, and I'm looking at the papers myself, and I'm thinking, if only I was on what you're saying I'm on. That would be. Yeah. I'd love to be on what you're telling me that I'm on in terms of wages. Yeah. And so, you know, the older players would have read and seen what sort of money I was on, and then they're probably thinking, well, I said, this new guy comes in, I've done all the hard work. Why should he get all the financial rewards? So I don't think that really helped things, and also as well when they had such a special team, and, you know, it was that era, the 84 to 87 era was a fantastic era for the club, as we all know. And, you know, they probably were thinking, well, you know, perhaps we didn't need to break up the team so early. And you had players like Wayne Clark and Adrian Heath, who, you know, played a big part certainly in the 87 season. And of course, I come in, as soon as I arrived, those two players are not going to play. And, you know, they're friends with the older players. And, you know, there's a lot that goes into getting a good team spirit at a football club, and it's one of the hardest things to do. And it's no different now than what it was back in 88. You have to get the team spirit right. You know, you can talk about the current team at Everton and in 2021, but if the team spirit's not right, you're not going to win anything or go anywhere. And there was lots of issues going on, and of course we was all trying to prove ourselves as young players, and they was looking at us and judging at us. You know, it was difficult at times, and there was bits of friction on and off the field. But I don't know. I didn't know any different, because I just obviously come from West Ham, where everyone got on. We was all fine and everything, and then I come to Everton, and it was all a bit all over the place. But, you know, we got to deal with it, I think. But all of which, if you had all that ingredients about the team spirit, and you look back and look at some of the players we had, especially I would say from 88 to maybe 91, we had some fantastic players at that football club, and we should have done a lot better. We should have been winning trophies, and we should have been finishing higher in the league. But as I said, if you don't get the team spirit right, it doesn't do things.
Yeah, well, that first season, Tony, that's really interesting hearing you say that, because we had Kevin Ratcliffe on, and he sort of said similar, that there was no animosity. It wasn't meant, but there was just a natural divide somehow. But that season, we got to Wembley twice under very different circumstances. Firstly, let's concentrate on the Zenith Data Systems Cup. Now, we've got listeners out there who are saying, what did he just say?
What's that? What is that?
and the reason I say that is, were you like that as a player or the team, or was that a trophy that you took seriously?
Well, I think, like with any competition, I think probably the modern day equivalent of that, what you're talking about now, is probably the League Cup. You know, because you've got obviously Champions League, Premier League, FA Cup, and then League Cup is number 4 on the list.
Yeah.
And in those days, you know, there was no Europe. We was banned from playing in Europe because of what had gone on at Heysel. So there was no European football. So it was the order was FA Cup, then it was winning the league, and then you had League Cup, and then the 4th position was this Data Systems Cup that came along. And I think that was invented just to replace the European football, or the lack of European football. So I think it's fair to say at the start of the competition, especially, you know, I don't know off the top of my head, but I'm guessing the crowds were really poor, you know, whoever we played. And it's one of them that until you get to a semi-final, you're not really bothered about anything, are you? So, you know, you get to a final and then you start thinking, wow, this is good. And of course, for me, it was my first sort of opportunity to play you know, I played for England, but not as a club player. I hadn't played at Wembley before because West Ham, we was never good enough to get to Wembley. So, you know, to play against Forest, I know we lost the game, but for me, I was really pleased. I scored my 2 goals, and I'm then starting to think, you know, like look forward to the FA Cup final and hopefully do the same in the FA Cup final.
Yeah. So the follow-up to that really is the FA Cup final. So if someone looks at that on paper now and it's Everton versus Liverpool in an FA Cup final, that looks romantic, it looks glamorous, but the circumstances sadly weren't really about that. Now, again, going back to we had Ian Snowden and Colin Harvey on the show, they said it was almost an impossible task for Everton to win that trophy. The country and the Wales were behind Liverpool, if you will, because of the Hillsborough disaster. Take your mind back to that period. Did you feel that? Because you were in the city at the time during that tragedy. Did you feel it was an impossible situation for Everton to be in?
Yeah, I agree with the boys. You know, I think on the day, you know, everyone wanted Liverpool to win for obvious reasons. And if we'd have won, they would have gone, oh, yeah, but you only won because Liverpool weren't concentrating. So, you know, I think it just was what it was. But, you know, I look back on it, and obviously all the emotions of the semi-final, you know, because people forget we was playing in the other semi-final. You know, obviously Hillsborough was the main thing that happened, but you know, all my family and friends, they was at Villa Park. And, you know, I'm looking at you 2 boys trying to see how old or how young you are. I'm not sure if you remember the terrace days or not. I don't know, maybe you're borderline.
First couple of seasons with terraces for me, with my dad,
So, you can remember in the terraces were quite a scary place, weren't they? And, you know, there was a lot of overcrowding at many of the games. And, you know, I think that... You look back and you think, wow, Villa Park, you know, that could have involved some of my family, some of my friends, and it could easily be Villa Park and not Hillsborough. So, you know, it was a you know, an awful tragedy what happened. But what it did do, it united the 2 clubs, it united the city. And, you know, I've got to say the way the people of Merseyside, you know, dealt with what had gone on was unbelievable, will stay with me forevermore. And, you know, listen, I played for Everton, so my love of Liverpool Football Club, when you sort of talk about, I mean, you know, always like, no, Everton, I'm not interested in. Well, you know where I'm coming from when I say that. Of course. But you know, that was a human tragedy. It wasn't a football hate or love as such. It was a human tragedy, and I think it affected a lot of people on Merseyside. And you know, it was just fitting really that the 2 clubs got to the final. And then of course on the day there was a good game of football. Really was a good game. But I let myself down because I didn't play very well. You know, you look back and you think, what could I have done differently? I would say probably going to sleep before 4 o'clock in the morning probably would have helped. I was genuinely so excited to play in a cup final. Never ever played in an FA Cup final. I didn't take sleeping tablets, so I was just laying there like wide awake. And of course, you know, people say, well, what difference does that make? But if you don't get the sleep in and, you know, recharge the batteries and the energy, and then it was about 95 degrees on the day as well, it was boiling hot. And I just had a really poor game. I loved the occasion. Obviously, I was gutted that we lost the game. But, you know, I was proud to have played in my one and only FA Cup final. I'm really proud to say that. But, you know, I just wish it could have been under different circumstances, and I could have done better, really, I think, as an individual, you know. I mean, there was some great personal performances, Stuart McCall scoring the 2 goals, and there were some other good performances by our team. But, you know, it was a real disappointment to lose.
Okay, and so then the following season we finished 6th in the league, which obviously wasn't as high as what we'd been previously in the 80s. A couple of new signings came in, Martin Keown being one of them. I think it's quite famous how Colin Harvey used to try and get we mentioned before the team spirit. I think he was trying to get the team spirit then, you know, Chinese meals, going out for beers and stuff like that. The famous story that Mark Ward told us where I think he set Barry Horn's fancy dress costume on fire one time. Bit of a bust up between Keown and Sheedy. I'm just wondering anything from those times, any of those bonding sessions that stick out. And we mentioned before it wasn't quite working and gelling together. Do you think those bonding sessions helped in trying to get the team spirit together?
Well, I think they did to a degree. Yeah, I mean, again, like looking back previously in my West Ham days, like we had Christmas parties because everyone had a Christmas party back then. That was really the sort of going outside of things, really. I mean, because I suppose when you're in London, there's a lot of people coming from all different places and travelling maybe a bit more. But of course, on Merseyside, when you play for one of the two teams, you're very on top of each other. And Colin was very, he was very encouraging about doing the Chinese and everything when I first arrived at the club. But of course, when Colin got sacked and then Howard took over, I think Howard was even more for going out and getting the team spirit together. And listen, there's lots of things that went on, and you look back, and I actually missed the Martin Keown and Kevin Sheedy incident. I missed it because we ended up. I think there was a pub in Southport we ended up drinking in, and listen, I've got to be honest, in those days I wasn't a particularly good drinker, so I sort of went, I knew when I'd had enough, sorry boys, I'm off, or going home type of thing, and I went home, and then it kicked off, and I didn't know anything about it. And then obviously when the boys, because I used to travel with the younger ones, so there was Stewie Mack, Martin Keown, Peter Beagrie was in Formby, and Neil McDonald, so we all sort of commuted in together. And then in the morning when they picked me up, they went, "Oh, Martin had a row with Sheeds," and then it all went from there. And then it was in the papers, and it was just a bit unfortunate, really. But what it's like when people have had drink. It's not a good time to start discussing football things, is it? Really? Yeah, so things like that happen. But in general, I think the Chinese were great. Apart from if you was paying for the meal. And I think once I'd got fined and I'd said a couple of things or whatever, and Howard decided to fine me, and it was like a week's wages or something, and I paid for the whole Chinese out of my week's wages. So it's not fun when you know that you're literally paying for all the food. So but it was fun times. You look back,
yeah. Probably good there wasn't camera phones at that point, actually, wasn't it?
Well, Andrew, I mean, listen, I know the players are a little bit sort of protected species nowadays, but it's so difficult for them. It's a good point you're making, because in those days, if people come up to you, they would find a bit of paper from over the desk over there. So, can you sign this, please? Yeah. If they was proper autograph hunters, they'd have their little cameras, like the Insta cameras or whatever they was called. But now everyone's got a phone camera, and you imagine if something kicked off now. I always say, like, even though I'm not sort of nowhere near as high profile as obviously I was as a player, but if I had a row with someone now, within 30 seconds, you could literally be all around the world, people showing that you're having a fight with a bloke down the road. So you do have to be really careful, especially the players of today.
Okay, thanks for that. So that season you were partnership with Graham Sharp, wasn't it? I think that season it was obviously another Everton legend. What was it like playing with Graham? Obviously, we didn't see him at our age group, but uncles and dads have said what a great player he was. What was it like playing with him for yourself as a young player?
Oh, he was a fantastic player, Sharpie. I mean, you look at his goals record and what he'd done for the club, what he achieved. He was a big part. I mentioned that 84 to 87 period. He was a big part of that. So, one of the reasons that I signed for Everton was to go and play alongside Graham Sharp. I wanted to play with all the top players. I love Peter Reid. I thought Reedy was a great player. And then you got Neville in goal, Kevin Sheedy, Dave Watson, Trevor Stephen, all these fantastic players. But Sharpie was one of the main reasons, because I had Alan Smith playing for Arsenal. Yeah. And obviously it was all partnerships in those days. So if I'd have gone to Arsenal, I'd have played with Alan Smith. And if I go to Everton, I'll play with Graham Sharp. So Sharpie was a huge pull in me going to Everton. So, listen, how do I sum up the partnership? I think there were times where he was unplayable. There's no doubt about that. There was other times where we didn't click. I think with Sharpie in the team, and Sharpie being used to playing with all the other players, because I had a conversation with Kevin Sheedy, funny enough, and I wouldn't say it was a row, but it was a disagreement, because I was showing for the ball to feet, and every time I went to get the ball to feet, Sheeds has just smashed it 40 yards over my head to Graham Sharp. And, I wasn't used to that, because, in the West Ham team where everything was all trying to play football all the time, And I'm not saying Sheeds was just smashing it. He was playing a controlled 40-yard pass to Sharpie, and he'd take it down on his chest or head it or whatever. And the problem was I was now 30 yards away from him, and I couldn't get near him for the knockdowns or for him to chest it down to me. So, I was saying to Sheeds, you can't always play it to Sharpie. If I'm shouting at feet, playing to my feet, son. Nowadays, everything, as you would know, everything's to feet, isn't it? It's all passy and everything. So that was what I was trying to do. But, I think the thing I'm trying to say is I had to adjust my game.
Yeah.
And I was asking Sheeds and Sharpie to adjust their game. And that was all part of the learning process for me as a young player, trying to play with these experienced players. But I loved my time with Sharpie, I really did. And then, of course, Mike Newell arrived at the club, and then it made it a little bit more difficult because it wasn't just me and Sharpie guaranteed places. Mike Newell was quite rightly fighting to have his place in the team. And, at one stage, he was playing alongside Sharpie, and I was on the subs bench, and it was very frustrating for me.
Yeah, Tony, when you very kindly agreed to come on, there was a number of things that I instantly said, I've got to ask Tony Cottee this. A number of them are in this 1991 season. The first one really is quite a unique situation. I've never seen it happen anywhere. Colin Harvey, unfortunately, lost his job as manager, only to come back as first-team coach days later. Now, we've had Colin on the podcast, like I said, and he said in hindsight he shouldn't have done it, but he just wanted the best for Everton Football Club, so he done it. For you, as a player and the group of players, how did you feel seeing that the manager goes and then returns as a number two?
Well, as you quite rightly say, it was a bit of a unique experience. And from my point of view, I must admit I was a bit worried about the situation because quite obviously Colin had signed me. So, first things first, I felt that I'd let Colin down, because he'd signed me to score those 25 goals a season I mentioned. And I hadn't done that in the first 2 seasons that he'd been in charge. And I think it was the start of, I think I'm right in saying it was the start of my 3rd season when he got the sack.
Yeah.
And of course, when Howard was appointed, I then thought, oh no, here we go. Because I thought to myself, well, Howard's going to come back in. He's going to have all his favourites. And then, as I said, there was a lot of the boys still there. There's a good 5, 6, 7 players still there from the time before. And I thought, well, it's going to make it really, really difficult for the younger players. And we was really fighting hard, the younger players, to try and establish ourselves in that team. And, of course, when Howard was appointed, I know Colin was still going to be there as a coach, like, to obviously try and put our names forward. But Howard was always going to do it his way. And I remember the first game, Howard was back in charge, and it was Sheffield United away. And he had me and Peter Beagrie on the bench. And it was one of the worst games. I sat there the whole game. I never got on, and nor did Biggs. And watched the whole game. And it was one of the worst games I've ever seen. But bearing in mind, we'd obviously been losing games. So it was, in a way, it was sort of good point, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And, we came in after the game, and Howard, he started at Neville Southall. And he sort of went round the whole room. Because bearing in mind, I think that, it was pre-Premier League. So it was 1 to 11. So it started off, Nev, absolutely brilliant, great saves. And then Snods, brilliant Snods. And then went nil point and then sort of worked his way round the team. Yeah. And then he got to number 12, which was Biggs. And he said, Biggs, something like, if you ever warm up like that again, you'll never, ever get in my team. And then he looked at me and he said something along the lines of, like, you will never, ever play for me until you start trying in training. You start trying in the reserve game. You will never, ever play for me, or something like that. And like, I was like, wow, like, because I'd never had anyone speak to me like that. Colin hadn't done it, and John Lowe hadn't done it at West Ham. And it was a bit of a wow, like, and then from that moment onwards, my back went up with Howard. Yeah. And, we was like that, clashing all the time. And this just went on for about, I don't know, 18 months, maybe 2 years. It went on for a long time. It didn't really help things because really Howard needed me in the team because I was the one who was going to score the most goals. But he didn't want to play me. And, one of the conversations we had, he said to me, Tony, I know you can score goals. He said, but I want you to contribute to the team and do the rest of the stuff. And I looked at him, I went, Howard, I said, look, I understand what you're saying, but I'm a goal scorer. I don't want to be chasing fullbacks and out by the corner flag. And when the ball goes in the box, I'm not there and not scoring goals. And it was very much, he wanted me to do one thing, I wanted to do another. And listen, I know what I was like as a player. I was quite selfish. I was arrogant and confident in myself that on my day, and I stress on my day, that I was a very good goal scorer on my day. And all I wanted to do was score goals. I didn't want to do all the other stuff, which listen, looking back, you can say, well, that's not fair and that's not right. You look at the teams now, you look at them all pressing and doing it as a team and everything. And there's some great teams out there, aren't there, pressing from the front. And, bearing in mind, listen, Ian Rush was doing it in the 80s, wasn't he, for Liverpool? So it's not a new thing, but, that's what Howard wanted. And as a result of that, we was clashing all the time, and he played me, then he dropped me, then he played me, then he dropped me. And it took me, as I say, a good probably 2 years. And then I won Howard over. I signed a new 3-year contract at the football club, and then Howard resigned about a month later. And I thought, and it pretty much just summed it up. It was always, at Everton for me, it was always 2 steps forward and 1 step back, 2 steps forward. And I never sort of got over that circle of events that was going on. But, it going back to your original, what you asked, I know I waffled on a bit, but, it was a bit different having Colin as a coach, because you couldn't go to him as the manager. You're now trying to talk to him as a coach, and he was he couldn't say what he wanted to say, I don't think. So I think it was awkward for him and awkward for us players as well.
Another one, Andrew, we talked about before off air, didn't we? The 4-4 Merseyside derby.
I can't believe we've taken that long to get to the game. I mean, what a game. It's funny because a lot of the Evertonians that you meet, they go, "Well, it must be the best game you ever played in." And I say, "Well, I never played in the game.
No.
I was a sub." And me as a substitute, I think I've already alluded to it, I didn't warm up, I didn't stretch, I didn't do anything. I was literally sitting there, and if you want me to go on, let me know, and I'll go on within 10 seconds, because I had my boots on, my pads on, shirt on. I was ready to go. Like, it frustrates the hell out of me nowadays. You see some of the subs, they've got no shin pads on, no boots on, no shirt on, and then like they then expect to sort of do a warm up and go on. Like I was, I didn't warm up, but I was ready to go, and I'm just sitting there watching a fantastic game of football. 1-0 Liverpool, 1-0, 2-1 Liverpool, 2-0, 3-2 Liverpool. At which point Howard goes, "Get warmed up." So I thought, all right. So I get up off my bench. It was about 75 minutes gone. Started warming up. It felt like forever, but I'm guessing it was about 8-9 minutes or whatever. And then he calls me over, take my gear off, ready to go on, puts his arm around me. He goes, "TC, go on and get me a goal." And I looked up at the old scoreboard. There was the big old electronic scoreboard behind the goal in those days. And I looked at the clock, and it said 84 minutes. And I looked at the clock, and I won't swear because I don't know whether I'm allowed to or not, but I thought, what the hell do you think I'm going to do in 6 minutes? Seriously. Because like normally when you come on as a sub, it takes you 10, 15 minutes really to get going in a game and feel a part of it. Yeah. But I had my dad. My dad always used to say things to me. My dad was in my era. My dad would have said to me, "Don't go out wide. Stay down the middle. You will not score a goal out wide. You will score down the middle." My dad always used to say that to me. So I thought, right, I think my dad stayed down the middle of the pitch. And I only touched the ball twice because I've watched the last 10 minutes when I come on. First one was a 10-yard layoff from the halfway line, and I didn't touch the ball after that. And then the second time it came to me, left foot, bottom corner, I made it 3-3. So, that was, I think, the feeling with that goal, that equalising goal, just in injury time it was. I think that was probably the only goal really that was up there with my first goal on my debut in terms of that elation and that feeling of what. And it's not just what I've done or what I've done or what the team have done. It was looking up at the fans going absolutely berserk because we'd equalised again. And then, of course, I then had the privilege to get the fourth equaliser when Barnsley had scored, and I got another goal, 4-4. And it was just, I don't know, if there's been a better Merseyside derby over the last 50, 60 years since the Second World War, someone will have to tell me which one it is, because I don't think there's been a better one.
I don't think there has, to be fair. I think that's the one, isn't it? That's the one that everyone lives in everyone's memory as well, isn't it? That's talked about.
30 years ago as well. It's unbelievable, isn't it? 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Probably, really.
Yeah. But that's proper Goodison, isn't it? With the atmosphere, like you say, the atmosphere, the night game, under the lights, Gladys Street. Brilliant, isn't it? Yeah. That's what it's about, isn't it, for Goodison?
Oh, it was, Andrew. Yeah, I mean, like those nights. I mean, unfortunately, in the 6 and a bit years that I was at the club, I mean, I've got to say those nights were sort of few and far between, really. But that particular night, that was a special game and special feeling for me to get those 2 goals.
Yeah. Okay, so another player you played with, Peter Beardsley, who was a fan's favourite at the time. What was he like? Decent player to play with? Frustrating to play with because he's type of player? No.
got frustrated. He was a wonderful player. I mean, I'd been in the England squad with Pete in the sort of the mid-'80s, so I knew how good he was. I knew that partnership he'd had with Gary Lineker, so I knew that me and him could link up and play well together. And what I loved about Peter, there was two things that I loved about him. There was, in terms of the team spirit side of things, and that, like Peter, he wasn't a drinker, and nor was Neville Southall, by the way. The two of them never used to drink, but whenever we had either a Chinese or we went pre-season, end of season, and all the lads went out for a drink, he always used to come out and be a part of it and join in the fun. And I used to admire him for that, because I think there's a lot of people out there who go, oh, no, I don't drink, I don't want to be around people. But he was always one of the boys, and I like the team spirit side of things. And secondly, and probably more appropriately, is that he was such a fantastic footballer. And I think there was one game, I can't remember who it was against. It might have been Leeds, back in the early 90s when he came to the club. And Peter beat about 4 players and went into the penalty area after beating the 4 players. And the goalkeeper comes out on the angle, and instead of shooting, which I would have done, there's no doubt about it, he cut the ball back square to me. And I've tapped the ball into the empty net. I was about 3 yards out. All I've got to do is concentrate and make sure you put it in the back of the net.
Yeah.
And the ball's gone in the back of the net. And Peter's come running over to me, jumping on top of me, cuddling me, and like as if I've scored the best goal that he's ever seen in his life. And he's just beaten 4 players and drawn the goalkeeper. And all I've done is tapped it. He's done all the hard work, and I got all the glory.
Brilliant.
And again, I really, really admired that about him, because he was such a fantastic team player. You boys would have seen him. In terms of team players, I don't think there was too many better team players. One player I would mention, you might not like me mentioning him, Emil Heskey at Leicester. He was very much a team player. He played for the team. It wasn't all about scoring the goals, but in terms of what he did for the team, he was fantastic when I played at Leicester. And Peter was the same when he arrived at Everton. He was just he was a great lad and a really, really top team player. And I loved playing alongside him. He was brilliant.
Yeah. Tony, I think if they make a Mount Rushmore of Everton players, there's one player who you played with who's on it, definitely, Mr. Neville Southall. At one time, the best in the world, maybe not so in the early 90s, but what was he like day-to-day at Belfield? What was his character like? Was he one of the lads, or was he like the godfather, if you will, of the dressing room?
No, Nev was just a nutcase, Nev. He was just mad. I mean, you always say that the goalkeepers are mad, but I mean, I think Nev was right up there in terms of all the crazy goalkeepers I played with. And listen, you said everything that there needs to be said about him as a goalkeeper. He was genuinely a world-class goalkeeper. But as a lad, he was funny as anything, very, very funny. Very dry, very sarcastic. Some of his one-liners, he absolutely destroyed people with one-liners, and you couldn't respond to it because it was so funny what Nev had said that you're so busy laughing that you can't come back to it because it was too funny, And to sum him up, I remember, I think it would have been under Howard, and he wanted to do some team play. So what he did, he got the reserves and the youth players or whatever it was to make it an 11v11 game at Belfield. And the whole gist of what we was doing was for the midfielders and the forwards, which was great for people like me because the whole session was based about scoring goals and creating goals. And I loved a session like that.
Yeah.
But for the defenders, now bearing in mind they're playing against maybe a couple of the youth team forwards or the reserve players, it's pretty boring. And for the goalkeeper, Nev, who's in goal for us, because it was very much the first team, Nev is just obviously bored as anything, really, really bored. So the game's gone on for about 30, 40 minutes and that, and Howard kept stopping it and like, let's do this, let's try this, and, just sort of team play and stopping and starting and everything. And then all of a sudden, everyone started laughing. And I thought, what are they laughing at? And we looked round, right, and Nev had climbed up the goalpost and was literally laying on the crossbar, on top of the crossbar. Yeah, he wasn't hanging from it. He was laying on the crossbar, and he was pretending to be asleep. Like obviously, one of the boys has seen it. We've all started laughing, and it just brought the house down. It was just absolutely hilarious. And I think, what do you say about Nev? He didn't care. He was his own man. He was his own person. I think if you follow him on Twitter now or read his book or whatever, he doesn't care. He says it how it is, and I admire him for that. I always got on really well with Nev, and he was a wonderful goalkeeper. But, the other thing as well that springs to mind was the five-a-sides. So I've come from West Ham, where the goalkeeper's Phil Parkes, who was a wonderful goalkeeper. You talk about world-class goalkeepers. Parkes, he was a really top goalkeeper.
Yeah.
But he couldn't play with his feet. You know, he was very uncomfortable kicking the ball and playing out from the back or whatever, because you didn't have to do it in those days. When the back pass, you picked it up and that was it, you know. So when I've gone to Everton, and this was the Friday before my debut against Newcastle, we do a five-a-side, and Nev is playing as an outfield player. And I couldn't get my head around it. I'm thinking, what is he doing? Like, because I'd never seen anything like it. And Nev, like, everyone's sort of taking it a little bit easy because we got Newcastle first game of the season, and Nev was running around kicking everyone, slide tackling and everything. It was absolutely hilarious, and I'll never forget that. And you know, he was one of the first goalkeepers, I think, who he actually wanted to be an outfield player. You know, you look at all the goalies now; they all think they can play and kick the ball and everything. And Nev was probably one of the pioneers. You had obviously Grobler across the road, but I think Nev was much better than Grobler in terms of his ability with his feet and how he could kick the ball and everything. But he was a real character. I love playing football with Nev. He was brilliant.
Another player I did want to ask you about briefly, if you didn't mind, and again, we've asked your ex-teammates Ian Snowden and Mark Ward about Billy Kenny. Now, what they both said, that they learned it was such, you know, such a shame what happened to Billy, because he burst onto the scene and he had off-the-field problems, which took his football career away. Can you recall how good Billy was around Belfield, and then, you know, how he left the club and how upsetting it was for the team?
Yeah, I think the thing is, Ian, like, I mean, obviously, I probably wasn't involved in it as much as the local lads. I mean, I think if you're a local lad, you know what it's like. If you're a local lad, you get all the gossip, and you know who's doing this and who. Like, my uncle said this, and my brother, and then you get all the information, because it's like a small village, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, I was very much like based in Southport, so I'd go, as I said earlier, I'd go to Belfield, I'd do my training, I'd go home again, and then I was doing what I was doing indoors. So I wasn't really part of the gossip scene as such. I don't mean that in a horrible way. I just didn't really feedback like the locals did. Yeah, listen, all I can say, like, you get the whispers and the vibes. Oh, there's a good young player in the youth team, and that was obviously Billy Kenny. And then he come through, and you could see he was a real player. He was a good footballer, and you could see he had a real chance and a real potential and everything. And then he just never progressed. And, you know, because he got to a certain stage, and sometimes it happens with young players that they break through, they sort of get to be a part of the first team. Sometimes they play 5, 10, 15 games, and then they can completely disappear off the radar. You can get players come through, I don't know, the likes of Stuart Barlow or someone like that, for example, and they play a few games and then they move on somewhere else. And, you know, you never quite know with the academy lads whether they're going to, you know, stay in the first team. You know, we all want them to be like Tom Davies, or, you know, other examples I'm sure you could give me that come through the academy and everything and that. But, you know, it's you know, with Billy, he got so far and then he never really kicked on. And, you know, obviously I know now that there was obviously other reasons, you know, for him not kicking on. But I didn't know that back then. I didn't know that at the time. I just thought it was sad that he never pushed on as a footballer, because he was a wonderful talent.
Yeah. Okay, so if we talk about the Premier League, when the inception of the Premier League, 92, you're obviously one of the players that went from before the Premier League, old First Division, into the Premier League. And, you know, since then, the wages have gone massive, TV revenue and everything. But at the time in 92, when it was talked about, when it was becoming a thing, was it a big deal for players? Was it exciting to know that it was going into a Premier League? What was the feeling about it from your point of view?
Yeah, I think there was an excitement. I think just before then there'd been talk, and, you know, because I think I'm trying to think. I was the PFA man at one stage, but I can't remember whether I was at that particular time or not. But there was talk of, like, the players not getting as much money as they should have done. There needs to be more money coming to the players. So, you know, me personally, I thought to myself, well, you know, listen, if this idea comes off, hopefully, and it was only hopefully, that, you know, we would all end up getting a little bit more money as a reward for what we was doing. Because, you know, I think, listen, footballers, I'm not going to say otherwise, but footballers have always been paid well. It doesn't matter whether, you know, once the abolition of the maximum wage was, you know, once that went, then players have always earned, you know, even back in the 60s, they was all earning good money in relation to what your average working class man was getting. But, of course, nowadays, I mean, that's just, you can't even get your head, I can't get my head around what they earn nowadays. It's frightening money. But, you know, in those days, we was we were sort of trying to get our heads around the fact that if the Premier League came into being, then we hopefully would all get rewarded. And I touched on my new contract that I got with Howard. That was signed in the Premier right at the start of the Premier League years, and it was an increase on what I'd got as the record transfer. Previously, which would have been 4 or 5 years previous. Yeah. It wasn't a massive increase, but it was an increase. So, I sort of benefited from that point of view. But, in terms of everything else, I think, there was a bit more razzmatazz, weren't there? I think the live games were very glitzy and the cheerleading. Yeah. You know what I mean? It was all a bit more glamorous and the names and numbers, which was a great innovation on the back of the shirts. Yeah. I think everyone really sort of felt, well, this is good, but there's no way, if you put your hand on your heart, there's no way that anyone would have said that what happened back in 1992 was going to have the effect that it's had over the last 29 years. Because, if you'd have said, like, players are going to be average wage of 60 grand a week or 100 grand a week or things like that, which is what we're looking at with some of the top teams, you would have said there's no way that football's going to go in that direction. But it has. You look at the stadiums, all the all-seater stadiums and where football is now with everything and the TV rights and the money going and all the coverage around the world. It's an incredible brand and product now. It really is. And, I don't think there's no way anyone envisaged what was going to happen. But, there's a lot of good things that have happened. There's no doubt about that. But I think there's also part of sort of, should we say, the older supporter that sort of harks back to the good old days of the terracing and having a hot dog that costs 20 pence and things like that. It's changed quite a bit, as you boys well know, from a supporter's point of view.
So what you mentioned there about the terraces and the change to the all-seater, was that different to playing? Was there a noticeable difference in terms of atmospheres in grounds? Obviously, Goodison's closed in, and a lot of English club grounds were at the time. Was there a noticeable difference when it went to all-seater in terms of playing?
Yeah, I think it was sad, wasn't it, when the Gladys Street went from terracing to all-seater. I think that was sad, and then they built the Park Lane end that was all-seater. It was just slowly dismantling everything. Listen, I grew up I was a fan in the 70s, a West Ham fan, and I was on the terracing and surging here and going there, and just wonderful times, and we just got on with it because it was very basic and primitive, but you didn't know any different, But once the all-seaters come in, there was definitely a change in the atmosphere, a change in the noise generated as well, because obviously you probably had 50% less people in that section. So where it was really, really noisy, you didn't get that because of people were sitting down, and it just, you lost the atmosphere a little bit. And I think that's I know it's a really delicate situation with all what went on with Hillsborough, but I am very pro the safe standing coming back, because I think if you get the safe standing, I'd like to think, I know Everton are going to be going to a new ground and that. I'd like to think that they'll do what Spurs have done with their new ground and have just a dedicated terrace behind one of the goals where you can sit down and you can stand up as well, because I think you would then get a lot more noise from the fans and they would feel more of a part of it, like what they used to in the old days. So, it is what it is. But, there was definitely a noticeable change, not just at Goodison, by the way, but every other ground you went to, even the Cop or the Stretford end or whatever ground you named, there was definitely a change in atmosphere and the noise coming from that part of the stadium.
Yeah. No, sorry, Andrew. What I was going to say to Tony there is Tony touched upon the Premier League having name and numbers on the back of the shirts. Now, Tony, just a side story. My mum does not like football, but she absolutely loved you for one reason. So Everton used to charge by the letter and by the number. So Cottee 9 was one number, 6 letters. Cheap. Yeah, so cheap. And then when you left, I went to Kinchelskis 17. And she said to me, "Can't you just get Cottee 9?" I was like, I wish, Mum. I wish she's gone.
That's a great story. Really good story. But it was all new for all of us, wasn't it? I just grown up with a number on your back, and then all of a sudden you had the names on the back and that. And I think it was good. I think it was good for the fans, and you like you say, if you went into the club shop and you could identify the player, because it's all right having a number 9 on the back of your shirt, but if that number 9 is Graham Sharp one week and then Tony Cottee the next week, and then Mike Newell the next week, you wasn't being the person you wanted to be. Yeah, but I think once the names went on the back, then I don't know for what bizarre reason, Ian, you would want to be me, but you could be me every week because you had your name and number on the back.
You're selling yourself short, TC. You're selling yourself short. So, What I did want to ask as well is growing up as a young Evertonian. Now, you eventually did leave Everton, and we will get to that. But every season, there seemed to be rumours of you being homesick, and it was like you were eventually always going back to West Ham. Was that just paper talk in the early 90s, the 91, 92, 93? Or was there something in that? Were you always sort of looking to get back to West Ham eventually?
Well, I think, certainly in the early 90s, I think a lot of the reasons for, yourself reading rumours like that would have been because I was in and out the team. And, obviously when you travel so far, like, listen, I'm talking to you guys today. I'm living in Southend. I'm in Essex. I couldn't be any further away, probably, from Merseyside, unless I went to the northeast of Scotland. It's literally 250 miles from me to. If I left now, it'd probably take me 5 hours in a car to get there. So, the point being, I was a long, long way from home. Yeah. And the reason I went to Everton Football Club was, listen, obviously I wanted to win trophies. I know that, but I wanted to play regular football and I wanted to be part of a successful team. So, of course, if you're not playing regular football, then, yeah, of course I'm going to be unhappy. And then when you're not in the team, I would say, being honest, every now and again, like my agent might put a little snippet in or something, oh, Tony's not happy. But It was all designed to try and get me back in the team, not necessarily to get you to move to somewhere else. And then, of course, you then had the papers, oh, Tony Cottie's not playing, oh, he can't be happy, he must be going to Arsenal or West Ham or wherever he's going, So there was a lot of rumours like that. As I said, in 93, I signed a new 3-year contract. Yeah. So I was happy. I was really, really happy. I'd won Howard Kendall over, and I was really happy up until Howard resigned. And from that moment onwards, and who took over after that, from that moment onwards, I think the writing was on the wall. And that was a great shame, really, because I think it all could have been so different. I look back now and, there's 2 things that I would love to have done as an Everton. Well, 3 things. I would love to have played under Joe Roll. For me, when Howard left, to get Mike Walker, I know he'd done well at Norwich, I understand that and accept that, but Joe Roll was the standout candidate. He should by far have been miles above anyone else, and he should have got the job. If Joe Roll would have signed, eventually Big Dunk would have arrived, and if Big Dunk would have arrived, I would have scored my 100th goal for Everton. I wouldn't have ended up with 99 goals. So they're the 3 things that, apart from not winning a trophy, obviously, because that is a real big regret of mine. But I think those 3 things were, but that was all intertwined with Howard leaving and Mike Walker taking over. And I think once that happened, as I say, our form went downhill, and it was, as we very nearly got relegated.
Yeah. Would have been a good partnership, that, actually, Ferguson Cottee. What a partnership that would have been.
Yeah, I was gutted that never happened, Andrew. I really was, because, as I say, I wouldn't just have got my 100th goal. I think I'd have gone on and got another 50, maybe 100 goals at Everton. I might have stayed there for the rest of my career. Who knows? You don't know, do you? But me and Big Dunk would have been a good partnership. Yeah.
So Mike Walker, as you say there, he done all right at Norwich. Was it always obvious when he came in that it weren't going to work? What was the issue? Because, as you say, he was, he'd done all right. Wasn't a standout candidate, but he was, Norwich were all right under him. When he came in, what?
Yeah, it's I don't know. Yeah, again, looking back,
because we beat Swindon 6-2, didn't we, in one of his first games, and we were like, oh God, this is going to be great.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it was a good start against Swindon, but I don't know. I think the lads, you very quickly suss out managers, and I think in terms of the training, a lot of the training was very, very basic. When I say basic, it was like they was training schoolboys, because the training under both Colin and Howard was very ball orientated. It was like head tennis and 5-a-sides and very, very simple but relevant sessions, or you do a bit of team play or whatever, Yeah. And then when Mike Walker arrived, and he had Dave Williams, I think his name was, with him, and Dave was putting sessions on that I did when I was a 13-year-old, and it was like little passing drills and things like that. And anyway, Mike Walker called me in. He called me into his office, bearing in mind I was the top goal scorer. And he said, "What's the matter with you?" He said, "Like, you don't look like you're enjoying training. You look bored." I went, "Mike, Gaffer," I said, "I am bored." I said, "I've done that when I was 13 years of age." I said, "I don't want to be doing passing drills and things like that." He said, "Well, what do you want to do?" I said, "I want to do 5-a-sides." I said, "I want to do shooting practices. I want to do passing drills." So there was that side of it. So I think the lads were getting bored with the training, and I just think with the manager, I think he was, I don't know, I just think he sort of, he didn't manage the players. I think certainly with Colin and Howard, there was interaction, there was banter, there was team spirit, there was good coaching, there was motivation. You had all that from both of them. But with Mike, I don't think, personally, I think he was a bit out of his depth. That's my own personal feelings on it. And again, I don't want to detract from managing Norwich City and doing what he did at Norwich, because he done very well, to beat Bayern Munich, third in the Premier League, playing in UEFA Cup for a team like Norwich. I mean, they're in the Championship now. Imagine they would take that all day long if you said you're going to do that this season. So I don't want to take away from his achievements at Norwich, but for me, Everton, it never worked. I felt he was out of his depth, and as a result of that, I think that the lads just, I don't know, I think as individuals and as a team, we drifted and we lost concentration. And football's not like a tap. You can't turn it on and off. You've got to be at it every single game. You've got to be on it, getting the results as an individual and as a team. Before we knew where we were, we was losing 3-0 at Leeds on the last but one game. And then we're going into the last game of the season in the bottom three, knowing that if all the results go against us, we get relegated. And, it was bizarre. It really was a bizarre season, especially after, you quite rightly say, we beat Swindon 6-2. And then, we then just went such a nosedive. And, and it's hard to pick it up. As I say, you can't turn it on and off. I know we won against Wimbledon, but, that was a really, really tough end of the season for us.
It was so scary, Andrew, wasn't it? As fans, I remember going into that Wimbledon game, and my dad was pacing the garden the week leading up to it. I think you were the same, Andrew, weren't you? Your dad's got a famous story of sneaking out that morning as he get into the game.
Yeah, we didn't have season tickets that season. We got the season ticket the next season. So my dad just pretended he went for a pint of milk and didn't come home all afternoon. So that's him. Where is my dad? I don't know where he's gone. We've got the radio on in the house. And obviously he's gone to watch the match. But obviously there's stories about the Wimbledon coach and everything, wasn't there? And the Everton fans and stuff. And as you say there, Mike Walker wasn't the best manager. It sounds like he'd lost the dressing room to, as the phrase goes.
To a degree, yeah.
What was he like? So was there any motivation the week leading up to that game then? Was it the players who rally around each other in order to get motivated for it? Or was it, how did that come out, work out, if you like?
Well, I think the players knew that we had to stand up and be counted. And I mean, if you look at that team that played against Wimbledon that day, there were some good players in that team. There's no way that it was a relegation team. We should never have ever been in that position. And then, of course, to concede a penalty after 5 minutes and then an own goal 20 minutes later and be 2-0 down against what was a good Wimbledon team. Let's not forget. I know Fash wasn't playing, but they still had the likes of Dean Oldsworth and people like that. It was a good Wimbledon team. So. I'm scratching my head standing there, moaning at the defenders, obviously, because they conceded 2 goals, thinking, how on earth are we going to get out of this? This is a nightmare.
Did you feel that, Tony, on the pitch? Did you feel that? Because I remember being in the ground, and before this game and since, I've never been part of a crowd that in the same second gasped and went silent. And it was sort of sometimes going 1 down, 2-0 down. Sometimes me sitting in the Gladys Street will think I've got to do more. I sat there thinking I don't know what's going on. Could you feel that on 2-0 down?
Oh yeah, of course you could. Yeah, I mean, there was an expectation, wasn't there? I think everyone who was in the ground that day just expected Everton to roll Wimbledon over, and that was it. And it was never ever going to be as easy as that. And of course, when the second goal went in, you're right. It was just because I think Wimbledon probably would have had their usual 50 fans behind the goal, and it was no sort of cheering really. I don't think from. It was just a deathly silence and a realisation, oh, my God, we are 2 goals down now. And as we all know, to come back from 2 goals down in a professional football match in the top flight is very, very difficult. It obviously it happens during the course of the season, but it's not that many times that teams come from 2 goals down. So, I think we deserve credit because obviously we got the penalty just before half-time and then, Barry Orm, normally when Barry, he'll take this in the right way, I know he would, but normally when he used to shoot in training, he used to run out the way because you knew it was going to hit you or hit someone at the top of the Gladys Street stand or something, But, I mean, the goal was just a fantastic goal. And he never, if he said he got a better goal than that in his career, he must be lying because that was just one of the best goals I've ever seen. Yeah. And then, of course, to get the winner, 8 minutes from the end was was just fantastic. And it was a bizarre day. And, you know, I remember sitting in the dressing room after the game and, you know, I think there was champagne flying and things like, you know, everyone, Mike Walker and all that, sort of, you know, drinking. And not just Mike, but some of the players as well. And, you know, and I'm thinking to myself that we shouldn't be celebrating this. You know, Everton Football Club should never, ever be in that position where you're going to go get relegated. Imagine if we'd have gone down for the first time in 40 years and you're a part of that team. You know, it would have been a disaster from the fans' point of view. And as a player, you've got that for the rest of your career where, you was one of those idiots who got Everton relegated. And I'm sat in that dressing room after, I'm thinking, we should not be celebrating. This can never, ever happen again. And of course, like, I think 3 seasons and 5 seasons later, I think Everton had sort of a couple more brushes with relegation. So, you know, it was obvious that a rot had set in at the football club, and, you know, it was going to take quite a while. It was going to wait basically David Moyes to come along to transform the club. But, you know, that particular day, it was, you know, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying I wasn't pleased and really, really happy at the end of the game. And when Graham Stewart's goal went in, I'm not saying I weren't happy and elated at the time, but I do remember sitting there thinking, you know, and I didn't go out. After my debut, I went out and celebrated. I didn't go out after that game and think, wow, we're staying in the Premier League, because it wasn't a celebration game. It was a massive relief.
Yeah.
Well, 3 games into the following season, 94-95, for me and Andrew, as young Evertonians, disaster happens. The number 9 had gone back to West Ham. Now, in that pre-season, I don't recall, and I could be wrong, I don't recall any rumours of this deal happening. It just seemed to happen out of nowhere. The whole deal seemed strange. Even getting David Burrows as part of it, it all just didn't add up. What's the story behind Brian's you leaving Everton? Was it a long process? Was it quick? What happened?
I think it was relatively quick. I mean, I had an agent at the time, and he sort of said that West Ham were looking for a centre forward. Harry Redknapp wanted a centre forward, and you know, the start of that season, you're right. I mean, listen, it's a long time ago. It's hard to remember exactly how you felt, but you know, from what I can remember, I don't think I was overly happy in pre-season. You're looking forward to the start of the season, but I wasn't sure if I was really a part of the manager's plans. You know, you get that vibe. And again, I must admit, I can't even remember whether I started. I don't know whether you boys have looked at it, but those 3 fixtures you mentioned, I don't even remember whether I played.
You started all 3, yeah. You started at home to Aston Villa on the first game, then we got beat by City away in top way, and you played all 3.
Yeah, so listen, I don't remember those 3 games. Listen, if you ask me what games I scored in, I probably could talk you through all of them. The games you didn't score in, you know, they just sort of go into a blur. And,
yeah, of course.
So, yeah, obviously I'd started the 3 games, and then I don't know whether something must have happened, because the next thing I know, I was playing in a reserve game at Goodison against Liverpool.
Yeah.
And the reason I remember it is because Julian Dix was playing centre-half for Liverpool, and obviously I was playing centre-forward for Everton reserves. But we just spent the whole game chatting to each other. Like, you know, it was like Dixie was saying to me, well, I think I might be going back to West Ham. And I went, well, do you know what? I think I might be going back to West Ham. It was one of those conversations. Yeah. So for once, Dixie never kicked me, and I never really sort of, you know, put a shift in, as perhaps like I should have done, because, you know, I'm thinking, well, I don't really want to get injured, because if I'm going to West Ham, I don't want to be injured type. And that was... So it was a bit bizarre, but I don't remember the reason, especially as you say, if I've started 3 first-team games, why have I then been put in the reserves?
Yeah.
But the one thing you can say is once you get put into the reserves like that, you're thinking, oh, here we go. Manager's not... It might have been an international break or something. I don't know. I really can't remember. And I must have just thought to myself, I think I'd got to the stage, I pretty much had enough of reserve football. I'd had all that. I'd had a bit of a taste of it under Colin. I'd had it, obviously, as I explained, with Howard. Yeah. And I just didn't really want to go through the process anymore of trying to fight my way back into the team. And do you know what? I probably should have done, but I don't remember doing this. I don't think I focused on the 100th goal aspect of it, because really, I mean, how stupid really of me to leave a football club when you're on 99 goals. That is stupid, isn't it? It really is a stupid thing to do, because, you know, if you just stay a couple more weeks, eventually you'll get a goal going off your knee or something, and you got your 100th goal. And so I don't know. I mean, I suppose the reason it was so quick, and the reason that I didn't think about the 100th goal, was, for me as a West Ham fan, the lure of going back to my hometown club. And, you know, it would have been the same if it was the role reversal, and if I was an Evertonian, I'd gone to West Ham, and you would do exactly the same thing. So, yeah, it happened really quickly. And then, you know, I signed for the club. And then, you know, I remember looking forward to playing against Everton. And that came round in the January, February, I think, of that season. And I scored 2 goals against Everton. It was a really wet pitch. And I remember scoring the 2 goals, drawing 2-2. So, yeah, it was strange for me, really. But I think as a footballer, you don't have time to think about things. You have to make snap decisions like West Ham, do you want to go or not? And obviously for me, it was, you know, I'm going to go. And, you know, I suppose your next question, I'm going to preempt your next question. You're going to say, how do I sum up my time at Everton? How's that? Is that the question coming next?
Yeah, you're very warm.
Yeah. How do I sum it up? I always say right club, but the wrong time. You know, I think if I'd have signed in, obviously, the mid-'80s, I would have won the trophies. You know, as you know, I left in 94. Everton won the Cup in 95 under Joe Royle. If I'd have stayed a bit longer, I would have won probably the FA Cup. You know, maybe, I don't know, maybe Paul Rydack might never have played. I might have been playing alongside Big Duncan. You just don't know, do you, with that game? So, right club, wrong time. I look back, 6 and a bit fantastic years. My daughter, Chloe, was born in Southport. So, as I always remind her when her birthday comes around in, 2 weeks' time, I say, Chloe, you was born in Southport, you're a Sandgrounder, don't forget that you was born up on Merseyside. And funny enough, she got married last year and her husband's an Evertonian. So how's that?
She's got great taste,
Full circle.
It was obviously meant to be, wasn't it? So, and then I look at my personal achievements, you know, to be top scorer for Everton 5 out of 6 seasons is a great achievement. They used to give me the Dixie Dean Trophy at the end of each season, saying you was top goal scorer. And you know they're upstairs in my trophy cabinet, very pride of place. You know to do that for Everton, and you know I think I'm number 10 on the all-time goal scoring list. You know behind some great names, you know Dixie and Bob Latchford and Sharpie and all those wonderful names. Tommy Lawton might be up there. You know, there's some great names. You don't need me to tell you the number 9s that play for the club. So, I look back with real pride of what I did achieve, but also a tinge of sadness that I didn't achieve certain things and, like getting the 100th goal. But I think the main thing that really annoys me is I didn't win anything at Everton Football Club because I'd love to have felt what it was like to win something at Everton. And I also would love to have given something back to the fans because through the thick and thin, even when I was playing reserve football and everything, I can't stress how great the Evertonians were with me. You know, not everyone, obviously. Listen, I'm not silly. I know that there's obviously always going to be a small minority of people that think you're not a good player, you should do more. You know, and I understand that would be the same at every single football club. But I would say the vast majority of Evertonians fully supported me and backed me. And, you know, whenever I speak to Evertonians now and I come up to the game, as I say, it's not too often because of how far away I am. But when I come up to the games, and hopefully I'll be doing it next season, I'll come up to Goodison and I always get a fantastic reception off the fans. And I love that. And that really means a lot to me.
Yeah, no, Tony, it's been absolutely fascinating and a pleasure to speak to you. We don't want to keep you much longer. If you don't mind, 2 quick questions before you go. When someone says to you, the Everton Football Club, what's the first memory or the moment of the game? What are you most proudest of your time at Everton Football Club?
Oh, wow. It probably going to sound a bit bizarre because I think I don't know the exact figures. I played 230, 240 games for the club. But I think my first game for Everton is the one thing I'm the most proud of. And it's almost sad in a way. You can play all them games and the one thing that you're most proud of is your debut because, I won't repeat myself because I've already told you about it, but I think that was, for me, that was the standout game of my career. You know, yes, the 4-4, the Wimbledon game, being the top scorer, all the different things that happened during the course of my career. And there's probably many other goals and games that I've forgotten as well. But I think the one thing, if you say to me, what's your best memory at Everton, I probably would go for my debut.
Well, that's a great shout. And finally, this podcast is going to go wide to Evertonians worldwide, Evertonians who loved you as kids, as men. Have you got a message for the Evertonians who are listening to this?
Yeah, I've got a message that I think the good times are just around the corner. I think you've been very, very patient. And, for Everton to go what's going to be coming up for 26 years without winning the trophy is not good enough for Everton Football Club. I would say that first things first. Listen, guilty as charged. I've been a part of the reasons why that's not happened. I accept that. But, I think the good times around the corner. I think the club's got a very good manager now. I think there's some fantastic players at the club. I love Richarlison. I love DCL. I think he's fantastic. And many, many other good players at the club. You've got an incredible football stadium coming in the not too distant future. You know, I think I've seen all the plans and the drawings and that. And yes, it's going to be very, very sad to leave Goodison. And I hope I'm a part of the celebrations and all the history and the memories that are going to be on that special night when Everton finally play their final game. But you look at where the club's going at the moment, you look at the new ground that's come in, and you can only think that Everton one day, I'm not going to say one day soon, because it might take a little bit of time, because you can't build everything overnight. It might take a little bit of time. But I think the new ground, I think I'm right in saying, is about 4 years away.
Yeah.
Let's say in 5 years' time, I think all the Evertonians around the world will be looking at a different football club and a club in a different place. And by that, I mean challenging to be in the Champions League every year. I know hopefully they're going to do it this year. They're going to put in a really, really good challenge to get into that top 4. And what Evertonians want, they want that to happen every year. And they want to win a trophy as well. They want to win the FA Cup. How can Everton not have won the League Cup? That's madness as well. That's got to be put right as well. And then you then look to European football. So I think the good times are coming back to the club. And hopefully I'm going to be viewing from a distance, and I'm going to be enjoying Everton going on to win trophies and get the club back to where it was back in those glory days of the mid-80s, just before I arrived at the club.
No, that's an amazing way to end the show. Tony, when the Wales opens up, we've got a studio in Liverpool, so when Sky sends you to Goodison, please pop in for a beer. There's a crate on us with your name on for the train journey home. How's that sound? That
sounds really good, guys, but I've still got to get to Euston and find my way home. I'll probably get lost. If you give me a crate of lager, I'll be drunk and won't ever get home. But that's the idea of it, isn't it? So, but no, listen, that's very kind of you. And, as I say, I don't think it's going to be till next season, but I always get an invite from the club to come up for at least one game a season. So when I'm up there, I'll drop you boys a line, and hopefully we can follow up on this conversation, and I look forward to that break.
Can't wait. Whoever said don't meet your heroes is a damn fool. Tony Cottee, thank you for joining us on Across the Park podcast.
Andrew, Ian, thanks. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks.
Come on, Everton. Come on, Everton.